Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my channel S2T. In today's show, Camera Tuesday, we're gonna talk about Sony PXW FX9 aka FX9. So let's dive right into it. Well, what we are talking about? We are talking about a quote unquote cinema camera, and you have to understand this very thoroughly that cameras generally have different categories. You can have your bare minimum camera that will be generally used in your mobile phones, GoPros, and things of that nature. Then you will have something bit bigger, bit beefier, generally DSLR and mirrorless range. Then you're gonna go a bit more like this category FX9, FX5s, and these kind of series C200, C400, C700. And then you're gonna have your complete professional pro cinema camera where you're gonna have red epic, RELXR, things of that nature. So generally these are the primary four categories of it. Now this is quote unquote cinema camera, but it is more focused on the third layer where it can do cinema, it can do competent quality cinema, and it has more than enough. Like if you want to make cinema out of this camera will not be your limitation. Like, oh, my camera was the bottleneck, that will not be the case. However, it's if you want to do best of the best optical performance, Sony have a different line for that, that is Vegas. So when you are talking about this, you have to keep that in mind. It's not Sony's highest offering, it's like the best, the most capable camera they can make in every regard, and they're gonna give you a certain price. The price is around $11,000. Now it is 35mm full frame. Now this is one thing that you have to understand. Almost all industry wants to have the biggest sensor, biggest lens possible, but in the early eras of basically digital photography, even in film photography, when they wanted to make film roll, they took the size of normal film that was used in cameras, 35mm. Problem was to roll it fast enough, they could not do it. So what they did, you take a normal film roll, it's generally like this, vertical, aka horizontal. So they figured out if they made the frames would remain literally horizontal, but the film will rotate vertical. That way they have to reduce the travel speed. Basically they do not rotate it as fast as possible. That's how we got into what we call super 35. That's why 35mm is 35mm. What do you have when you say super 35? It generally means crop factor, and crop factor is more or less the same as APS-C. That is the reason, because like the frame, instead of frame like this, the framing was like this. So that's what created this super 35 era in cinema industry. And when first digital cameras started to come out, silicon had the same issue. Making a full frame silicon sensor was too damn expensive, so companies were like, okay, we're gonna make that same thing, super 35. But as time progressed, as silicon engineering became cheap enough, as processors became cheap enough, right now the most expensive part in a camera is not the sensor, it's the processor that goes behind it. So once the prices started coming down, every Tom, Dick and Harry is like, let's go as big as we can do. The best example of that is Endgame and Infinity War, because both of them were shot on something that was bigger than full frame. Generally people go to full frame, they went directly up to medium format, that was 65mm. And even movies which is not that high budget, like Joker, they are also going for that large medium format camera system. And even some Christopher Nolan also shoots those kind of system. So every Tom, Dick and Harry wants to go big. Now 35mm is the next step. Now will people go above 35mm? Not likely, simply because 35mm has been in the format for 150 years. So that is why 35mm is such a big deal. On top of that, if you are coming from DSLR, if you are coming from full frame mirrorless like A7 Mark III and all that, you have a certain expectation of your cinema camera. And Super 35, first thing you will find, hey, wait a minute, it does not look right, because the ISO performance does not match up. And I'm talking about a super expensive camera versus super cheap one. How the heck that's, again, sensor is small. So if you want the best technical performance out of it, bigger sensor plus bigger lens equals awesome. So that is why every company, including Canon, including Panasonic, including Sony, they are all going to full frame for basically videography. Even slowly they are phasing out super 35. So this is the next chapter. Now this is autofocus capable. Now you have to understand this. In cinema industry, the moment you say autofocus, they're gonna say, there's the door, please disappear. Now the reason for that is autofocus, you do not have control over it. Basically it does work reliably, absolutely it works. The problem is it does not work the way you want to. Let's say you are making a romantic movie and everything is slow, methodical, you are taking your time, and you have characters coming in and all that, and the autofocus guy, the person who's focus puller, he's gonna slowly rotate things like, okay, let's take it time. But if you have autofocus camera, you do not know whether sometimes it will like latch on instantaneous, sometimes like keep hunting, sometimes it will be like too jarring, sometimes too slow. It will look odd, wrong, and people don't want it. Like in cinema, you say autofocus, is like disappear. Now in documentary, you do not have a luxury of a focus puller where it's like there is a guy who's like pulling focus. Sometimes they do try it for once in a while, but that drastically increased your cost basically. So because there are very few people who can do that, single-handedly handling the camera and focus pulling. There are people who can do that, but those are very expensive people. So in those kind of industry, and especially if you are talking about covering a sports photography and things of that nature, yeah, ain't nobody got time for that. So for autofocus is becoming very important. Now Sony knew that autofocus was important. Many cameras had, Sony's FX lineup had autofocus, but they were very useless simply because they were contrast based. So 100% useless. But now they are going phase detect. Basically they are taking knowledge learned and gathered, polished from Alpha series, and they are pouring into this. And this puppy can do 6K 30 frames per second, which is a good enough resolution. And if you are like, hey, all I want is 4K, this puppy is like 4K at 60 frames per second. It's a capable camera. Now one of the USP, aka unique selling point, or something that only this camera can do, it has a linear variable ND filter inbuilt. What does that mean? That simply means any lens you put on it gets a variable ND filter. Basically you can be like, hey, I need 3 stops of ND filter. You're gonna find it very difficult. You can easily buy 2 ND stop and 4, but you will not find 3, and that's always the issue. If you want little bit of ND, you can't do that. If you want little bit more, you can't do that. That's the biggest issue with when you have ND filters in cinema industry. They have a plates, giant ND plates, and they utilize that constantly, but they are always limited because like, hey, I want little bit more, little bit less. You can't really do that, so they have to change the aperture or shutter angle. Here you have smooth gradient control. Basically you're like, hey, little bit more, little bit less. Like literally people have successfully done shots where they're walking from indoor lighting to outdoor, and the exposure remained constant. Why? Because this was slowly doing. If you try to do that with Canon systems, will it work? Absolutely, but probably it will like khachang khachang khachang, that will happen. And you can easily see that step by step motion is changing. Here it gives you 1 extra layers of control, because right now you only have 3 levels of control. You have your ISO, which generally camera only has 1 ISO. Then you have your what we call aperture. Now aperture controls the field of view. How does it look like? Does everything looks in focus? Does everything appears in sharp or soft, and whatever you have, that is controlled by your aperture. And then you have your shutter angle. Now again, shutter angle controls the motion. Like if you want to do action scenes, you're gonna be like 190 100th of a second, 1/200th of a second, something like that. But if you want romantic, like movie like Her, you want to be like, hey, let's make it gentle, let's make it like 1/24th of a second. So you can't change the shutter speed because it will change the mood. It will literally stick out like a sore thumb if you change the shutter speed mid-shoot, mid-movie. You do not want to do that. So again, that is locked. What about aperture? Again, aperture physically changes how the scene looks, so you cannot tamper with that. Then you are limited with ISO. Problem is their cameras only have 1 ISO. Every time you change ISO, you are changing the boost, okay, gain. So that's a limitation. Some cameras have bypassed that ISO issue by utilizing what we call dual native ISO. Basically, they have 2 physical circuits that are doing that. But again, you still have 2 steps. What if you want to do smooth control? Linear variable ND. So that's a very big deal. And people who are buying these cameras, they are flat out tell you like, this camera, is this the best? No. Is it frustrating to use? Yes. It's Sony minutiae, so you're gonna be frustrated as hell. But just that fact, that the fact that they can literally do like, oh, weather is changing, I got this. Oh, weather is changing, I got this, no problem. Like just that fact alone, many documentary shooters are like, I'm not even touching anything unless it has that linear variable ND. So it's a very big USP. So you have to understand the market, suspected market for this. Sony was not that successful in terms of cinema, even though Sony is very well known for, because they made the quote-unquote HD standard with Star Wars prequel series. Basically that time that was a big deal, and Sony was a prime motivator behind that. They have been very successful in TV industry, basically electronic news gathering, basically people in the shoulder cam with professional handycams. Sony is slowly very successful in that. So that market control gives Sony some advantages. So they this camera is specifically targeted for what we call electronic news gathering. So can you make a movie out of this? Absolutely. Can you make documentary out of this? Absolutely. What if you have to do run and gun shooting and you have to do electronic news gathering? Absolutely. It has all the SDI output, which is the basically what we call industry standard for broadcasting system. It got this. It's like I got this, no problem. It even has 4 channel audio input. If you want to have debate and have all 4 people with their dedicated channel, it can do that. So that's quite amazing. So for a pro TV studios, like it has everything that you would need. Basically, it's almost like a Blackmagic camera, because Blackmagic is a broadcasting company first, then they make like cinema camera. So every camera Blackmagic makes is like a broadcast camera first, then a cinema camera. This is similar. It's like I got every bells and whistle you need for broadcasting system. Now, what about the performance specs? Okay, all cameras is like bells and whistles, but what about the performance? Like, how does it feel? Now, I specified autofocus is a very critical thing. Cinema industry does not want to even touch it, and the documentary industry cannot live without it. So, what Sony did here is kind of interesting. It's like you can buy Sony A series lineup, and they are very reliable autofocus. A9 Mark II, A7 Mark III. They have genuinely amazing industry-leading autofocus performance. But problem is they are uncontrollable. Like if they have a snappy feature to it, it's snappy, that's it, you can't change it. Here it's completely different. You can go in and you can fine tune it to way you like it. Basically, people have shown some example. I provided the video down below where you can see people are cranking it up for a, let's say, hockey game. They're like, okay, we need something that's like snappy, fast and all that. And when they are doing like more bathotic, more thought of cinema, they're like, hey, autofocus speed, slow down. And it's not like, oh, it only has autofocus. Like how the heck it prioritizes, how the heck it changes, how long it holds on some autofocus position, all those nitty-gritty things. So you have to know what you're doing to extract the most performance. It's not like a series camera where like, I know this is it, done. No, this you need to fine tune it. Then another aspect that Sony is slowly building up is that their large lens selection. Now that lens selection was always with Canon EF systems, but slowly but surely, like Sony Alpha series was successful. Sony started to make hundreds of lenses at this point in time. Like you can easily buy 28 plus professional lenses, and there are certain lenses which are only built for video, which they have like powerful focus and powered zoom and all that jazz. It's already there. On top of that, Sigma has already started to invest a lot, so you're gonna get high quality full frame quality glass for cheap of the price in Sigma. And if you're like, hey, I'm really stranded for cash, Tamron is your guy. Tamron is like, I got this. So lens selection is no longer an issue, which used to be the case with almost every camera manufacturer. Sony got this. And because it's a quote-unquote electronic news gathering, everything is focused around 4:2 10-bit. That is international standard for HD broadcasting everywhere basically. So you have to have 10-bit. Now 10-bit is very odd kind of scenario, because you have to understand it's a bit better than 8-bit, which is generally in your mobile phone, GoPros and all, things of that nature. But the color fidelity goes ludicrously high, because you are going from 220 to 233 or something like that. Basically 200 levels of color to 1024 levels of color. So that's a huge upgrade in color. So you can perceive insane amount of detail that which human eye cannot even perceive. And then you go to 12, 16, things of that nature, the perception goes down, simply because it reaches what we call S curve. Basically, oh, a lot of information, too much information, too much, yeah, I can't distinguish. Basically point of diminishing return. So jumping from 8-bit to 10-bit, you can easily tell, hey, that's a 10-bit footage. 10-bit to 12-bit, okay, little bit. 12 to 14-bit, 16-bit, yeah, like, dude, like, no. A colorist can tell you that. Why? Because that's their job. But common people, like, they can easily tell from 8-bit to 10-bit. That's what, like, gives you that feeling. Hey, this is a cheap camera. Generally, it's a 8-bit. So it can do that. Now, because this camera is certified for Netflix also, if you add on, you can get 16-bit external recording. Now 16-bit may sound a bit extreme, but you have to, if you are how you are plotting the data on a graph, it's a mathematical thing at the other end. So if you are doing linearly, 16-bit is enough. But if you are doing logarithmic, when you see people say log files and log files, you only need 12-bit. So you can do both. So 16-bit is there, but external. You have to add some extra gizmos to it, and it has dual ISO. Now, dual ISO is something very important. You have to understand this, simply because light comes to your photodiodes. Photodiodes converts it into electricity. Electricity goes to your chip. Chip converts it into signal. Now, that's signal to noise ratio, what we call. Now, if you make a chip that system that is like converting even the faintest amount of photon, like high sensitivity. Problem is the moment you use that in daylight, it will overexpose like crazy. So you cannot utilize. Okay, this one circuit does it all. So what people realize, dual ISO is the solution. It's like, okay, one circuit only designed for nighttime use, where or high ISO uses, and another for low ISO. So you're gonna, in daytime you're gonna get awesome system, and in nighttime you're gonna get awesome system. Because if you try to boost one ISO to every level, problem is the color shifting happens, noise pattern happens. It's not very well suited. It's like right tool for the right job. So for night you have different circuit, for day you have different circuit. Then sensor is also BSI, backside illumination, which is kind of new for this sort of camera, but in photography industry, DSLR and mirrorless, they have been along for like around 2012 and all that. It basically physically improves the signal to noise ratio because silicon is there and nothing in front of it. Generally silicon is there and then you have electrical wiring on top of that, so like photons have to go through some extra electron wiring, so inherently it has bad signal to noise ratio because again most of the photons are reflected by the wiring itself. So having BSI also inherently improves the signal to noise ratio. Then again that golden thing, electronic variable ND filter, so it's quite capable camera. How about the first thing you will think about is like, how does it compare to Canon C500 Mark II? Because I told you, every Tom, Dick and Harry is going to full frames. Canon also released this, and it was quite amazing camera simply because this is Canon. Canon is generally known for their triple hammer, but somehow this camera came out, which is like, amazing for first time for Canon. Mount, user changeable. Electronic viewfinder, user changeable. So it was quite amazing what Canon did with this, and it's unlocked as hell. It's like, no, oh, you want this, that, you have to pay this. No, it's like you buy this and you forget about it. So it's quite amazing. However, it's $5,000 more expensive than Sony system. $5,000 is more than enough at this point in time that you can buy quality full frame lenses at that price. So people have to like, hey, do I really need high bitrate? Then this does not have a variable ND. So people are like, dude, I have to do documentary. I do not control the lighting, flat out. Nope. But this is just something amazing. It, instead of using XQD or CFast cards, they are using CFast Express. Now if CFast Express and XQD look more or less the same because they are the same thing, they are physically compatible. Heck, they are intercompatible, aka if you have bought Nikon's camera and if you have done the firmware update, you can literally put XQD or CFast Express, and CFast Express is the evolution of XQD basically, because you have to understand CFast Express, they built CFast cards which did not sell that well. It was not that successful. It was only found in like some Blackmagic camera, some Canon's camera. It was not that successful. So Compact Flash Association goes with Sony as like, okay, you have a system, but you do not have widespread adoption because nobody wants to back Sony system. They want to back some third-party arbitrary system. So they're like, we're gonna build an independent standard using your main core backbone, and we're gonna market it as CFast Express. So both are the same thing. That's why you can put both of them interchangeably as long as the firmware allows it. Physically, they are compatible. As long as the firmware allows it, it can be done. You can do that in Panasonic camera, Nikon cameras, but for some reason, Sony in their own damn system, they are not utilizing the CFast Express, which is hilarious simply because if you go into Sony website, you will find more CFast Express card you can buy from Sony itself rather than XQD. It's like, you built it, utilize it. So that's kind of frustrating, and that is the another reason why it is limited to 10-bit, because this puppy can only go to 440 megabits per second, 500. It's fast enough for red epic camera, but generally you want even more for like raw recording and all that jazz. So people generally go to CFast Express. It's kind of like frustrating. It's like, Sony, you built it, utilize it. So that was frustrating. And on top of that, as more and more company, which includes right now, SanDisk is already making it, Samsung is already making it, and Samsung one is not released yet. Basically SanDisk one is already in the market in some places. Sony is already releasing their tough series for CFast Express. All of them are releasing CFast Express, because once CFast Express start to catch on, because it will be in the new Nikon cameras and Canon cameras, the price will drop, but XQD price will not drop. So it's like, why? So those are the two major things. Like utilizing this media, it's a really dumb idea. On top of that, limiting to 10-bit. If they had pushed it to 12-bit, it would have been amazing. But again, Sony has a Venice lineup. The moment you will ask this, they will say the same thing. If you want to build a Netflix TV show and you need basically high quality raw files, connect that external attachment and get 16-bit out. That is awesome. But if you really want all that thing internally, you have to buy a Venice camera. So that's kind of Achilles heel. But for more than enough people, the fact that autofocus is damn good, the fact that lens selection is quite good, the fact it is cheap, the fact it has that variable ND filter, all of those things combined, they're like, dude, is more than good enough. Flat out, if you buy that camera, you will not be like, I wish I had 12-bit. You're not gonna say that. And if you really need that, Netflix approval, you can just slap on that add-on. Yeah, it's a tedious and it will reduce the price cap, but again, if you want that variable ND, which is that important for many people. So it's not a clear-cut win against a Canon system, but it's also not a clear-cut lose. So this was my presentation on FX9 series cameras. I hope you liked it, learn from it. In that case, please click the like button, share it amongst your friends. That will help me a lot. If you didn't like it, didn't enjoy it, I'd urge you to press dislike, press it twice to show me extra disappointment, and please leave a comment because I try to reply to all of them. Subscribe, press the bell icon if you're free, and as always, thanks for watching.